Sunset. You need to turn back now.
Jane, I'm almost there. I can do this.
Well, it's that time again for a technical breakdown and head-to-head of new hardware and a new game. Hi techno gaming enthusiasts and welcome to my first face-off of 2015. We are fighting not only the undead horde's fading sunlight, but also how far each machine can go to present the game as intended. We don't have to look long to see the clearest difference by far from PC to console. And far is the operative word. Yes, draw distance is an area I will cover very soon, and as I said on my first impressions video, this will cover only the PS4 and PC versions of the game, as the delayed retail release outside of the US means the Xbox One version will not turn up for me until next month. But I have managed to play it on a friend's digital copy, but not long enough to do any meaningful checks. But the first thing for sure is that version does not run a native resolution of 1080, as does the PS4 or PC version. As of yet, I do not know and not been able to do a pixel count on it, but I would imagine it's around the 1350 1080 resolution as per COD Advanced Warfare, as this can fit easily into the fast SRAM as a render target, a problem the PS4 and PC does not have, meaning the textures can be streamed from the DDR3, and this is highlighted best by the much slower texture stream on the Xbox One, which you can see as you play it even as new scenes and cutscenes load in. But once I get my copy, I will do an update on this to confirm any other details and actual resolution, and if any more differences are evident. Here we have the PS4 and PC, both versions running on my AMD machine and my Intel Nvidia machine that represents the max available on PC outside of SLI Crossfire. All 3.5 gigabit, which is a video for another time, but the short version is Nvidia have been very naughty and lied on the specifications of the 970, and this may yet bite them in the arse and in the courts. We shall see. Current gamers who own it need not worry too much, as performance is still as good as ever. It's just that the last 512 meg is much slower. Nvidia say about 1/7 of the other 3.5 gig. It also has less ROPs and less L2 than they specified, losing 8 ROPs down to 56 from the 64 quoted like the 980, and the 2048 kilobyte L2 cache is actually chopped down to 1792, losing 256 kilobytes, which is 1/2 chunk of the L2 cache for the last segment, and this is the reason why you're seeing such a downgrade of speed in the last chunk of RAM. But for myself, who does a lot of other work and rendering, and including video rendering, this is a big problem. But I will update on a video on this area very soon. It's not a showstopper, but it is very bad practice for Nvidia, and not something any should support. But again, it's time for another video. At this point, one thing I will pick up on, this game, particularly being a GameWorks Nvidia linked game, seems to hold nice and steady on my 970, never creeping above the 3.5 gig threshold of VRAM usage. It just seems to cache the RAM the higher up the texture range you go. Now, whether that's a driver process or that's just the amount that the game actually uses being around the same as what the consoles would use, then that makes some sense. But it is a bit of a strange one. But my machine has not been used in anger other than the latest AC Unity final verdict video, and also now this new head-to-head. First up we have the PS4 version, which runs as near as damn it a locked or capped 30, with any drops being pretty much non-existent. In fact, peaks above 30, as I pointed out in my first impressions video, are far more common, with the cap breaking at points in the game, which is worse, as it makes that scene when it happens feel worse, as Judder is introduced, and I would anticipate this to be patched out soon and fixed. To cap at 30 means the frame rate is running much higher than that across play, and at its current settings it's running far higher than my current AMD rig. At the moment, the only time you get any drops, and they are very minimal, is at night time when you've got the torch on, and even then it's 1 or 2 frames with some tearing whenever it happens. I really cannot find any big issues in the game. It's pretty much a locked 30. Like I say, the biggest problem with performance is certainly when it jumps above that, and it does that at points inside the safe house and outside of it in the open world area, which is a good time to segue into the PC performance section. Now, on my AMD rig, the game does not run anywhere near as consistent as it does on the console, well, at least the PS4 version. At this point, when I drop the settings down, so I drop all of the LOD down to the lowest setting, which I'll touch on in a moment, and I change the HBAO down to SSAO, the same as the console, and then I leave the shadows at high, which is what the PS4 runs them at, and then the foliage at high, which is what the PS4 runs them at. Then the game runs, as you can see before you, below 30 pretty much most of the time. If you take off the motion blur, it helps a little, but the game feels worse for it because obviously you lose that ability to smooth it out, and it is a very, very good implementation of motion blur. The other thing is, I mentioned on my preview video, or at least my first impressions, was the ghosting image on the edge of characters' faces, which is coming from the SMAA solution in the game. It seems worse on AMD cards. The effect doesn't seem anywhere near as bad or as pronounced as it does on the Nvidia machine. And talking of the Nvidia machine, no surprise here that it wins the contest in performance hands down, but it isn't exactly perfect either. As you can see before you, again the night missions are the most strenuous when it comes to performance. In the daytime it doesn't seem to be as bad, and we get lows here of 38. But this is everything on settings on high, this is the shadows on very high, and this is the foliage on high, and obviously the draw distance as far as the eye can see. So the winner here on the performance is clearly the GTX 960 and i5, but that's no surprise. It's twice the power of the PS4 GPU and a hell of a lot more powerful than the 7870, and the i5 is a hell of a good processor. If you dropped all the settings down to the console versions, i.e. low draw distance and shadows on high, then you'd probably get a lock 60 or thereabouts, with some dips, but it'd be more solid than it is as you see here. So in the performance, first place is GTX, second place is PS4, and third place is the AMD 7870 machine. That's the performance section done. In terms of difference across the PC and PS4, as I said at the start, the LOD or draw distance is the biggest. PC has a slider from 0 to 100, and once you hit around 30%, performance can take a huge dip. My advice is to keep this at around 20%, but they've now done a patch to update and improve the performance of the game. But all they've really done is halve that slider. Where it used to go to 100%, it now 100% is 50%. Now, it doesn't seem to use the cores very well at all. In the actual safe house area, you can see the core usage. It's only using, well, on the AMD rig, it's only using around 4 or 5 cores, and it's not using those very effectively at all. Just like my AC Unity final verdict video, you can see here that the Intel CPU is far better utilised, and this highlights the stark difference between the Intel and AMD CPUs. Intel are far better at handling bad code, so unpredictable or branchy code and cache misses. Because their memory structure is light years ahead and their caching is so much better than AMD, you end up with times where you would miss it on the AMD. The Intel machine has the data when needed, so it's far better utilised, therefore the CPU is not stalling. On top of this, their turbo and wake and sleep or start and go mode is just light years ahead of what AMD can achieve, and this creates these stark differences you see in games. But it is a subject for another video that I'll go into in more detail on my Windows 10 DirectX 12, and obviously how it affects the console balance. If parallelism isn't used on code, and as we're seeing here very well, and you're not stressing your cores and threads and balancing your work out very well, then Intel are going to shine over and above AMD all the time. They are very, very good at running bad code, or at least unoptimized code. But let's get back to LOD. The difference here is the lowest setting of draw distance on the PC is still reasonably higher than what's on the PS4. Now, it's not a huge amount of difference. You're not going to all of a sudden notice that the whole game looks really barren. But if you compare them, as you see here, side by side, you certainly can see a difference. This doesn't only show in the distance view of bushes, trees, which tend to go from a very standard flat sprite on screen with a billboard of a tree going to an actual textured tree moving around. This obviously creates more aliasing, but at night time you can see that the light sources from the burning bins, not only do they not cast any light source at all on the PS4 version, but they also, obviously the LOD kicking in, they don't draw in, as you see here, until much, much nearer to what they do on the PC. Now if you drop the PC down to the lowest setting, it's still further away than it is here. And these are the kind of cutbacks that tell me that the issue with this game is they are not spreading their code across cores very well at all. And this is borne out in how you see it on the PC, and I'm pretty sure this is exactly how it's going to be on the consoles. Again, this just highlights from my console video how important the software is. We can see the engine is designed for strong, fast cores, and it's not multi-threaded well at all. On the consoles, running all this on one core is going to make a huge issue, and that's most likely the reason why the pairback is so extreme. Again, on DX11 you're going to get rendering issues because the dense worlds we're seeing now, and obviously far more draws for primitives than before, we are getting into the start of what these games are going to look like aimed at this specification, and this is still a learning curve for developers and programmers. The limit these engines will hit on the visuals on offer will improve vastly throughout the next few years. Outside of that, the texture quality is identical across all. Even on the highest setting, the PC is the same as it is on PS4. The motion blur is identical, and actually it looks slightly better in place on the PS4 than it does on both Nvidia and AMD machines. The PC version seems to have more edging or artifacting at the edge of it. The animation on the zombies is very good. The facial animation on characters can be a bit hit and miss, and the voice work again is not exactly astounding. The sound effects in the game, you get the lovely squelch of crunching of skulls. And the actual impact mechanism kicking in when you smack a zombie in the head, on the body, and their bones break internally. All of that is quite nice, and it's quite well put together. You've got some parallax occlusion mapping and some textures in the game which are obviously self-shadow as well from your own torch. Chromatic aberration is used extensively in the game. It's not an eyesore to the extent where it makes you feel bad, but it is probably slightly overdone. But it is going for that kind of bright sunshine saturated look, and that, to me, works for them. Shadows tend to look more towards medium, but slightly better than medium on console, so they're kind of just about, they're certainly as good as medium, but not quite as good as high. But to get the best balance, I'd say they're basically high, so that's what I've compared them to. There's not much difference between the two of them. And then you've got an isotropic filtering on the PS4, which is pretty much non-existent, it seems, and it's quite low. It's not a massive problem, but you can see here as I move backwards and forwards, the texture filtering from the angle of the camera is far more blurred. So yeah, not great. Another not great feature for the PS4. And you've got sun shafts from the skyline and obviously screen space reflection mixed with cube maps, but it's quite artifacty and it errors quite a lot. You get overbanding and draw issues from it like you would with any other screen space reflection, but it's a nice little touch. And aside that, post-processing and all other effects in the game are pretty much identical, outside of obviously the HBAO Plus on Nvidia cards and also the Nvidia DOF, which is just epically blurred. It doesn't really add much more to the detail of the game at all. It only works in cutscenes anyway, and even it hits the frame rate really hard on the GTX 970, so it's more a case of just showing off for the sake of showing off, and the DOF that's already in the game on the consoles and AMD cards is the one that I'd prefer anyway, so I wouldn't bother putting it on. It's not really a benefit. Overall, I'd say, as we're sitting here, when it comes to visual and audio fidelity, audio is identical, they're all very strong, but visual fidelity certainly goes to the PC version, having that extra touch and extra layer of fidelity. Also, I love when it rains in the game, it looks beautiful across all versions. So as it stands, as a surprise, the GTX 970 and i5 is the winner, and then the PS4 comes a second, and the AMD rig becomes a third. As always, I hope you guys and girls enjoyed this. If you did, please leave a thumb up below and a like, subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate each and every one of you that does. I'd love to hear your thoughts and feedbacks below. I'll have my review up very soon. This has been dead good fun, but now I'm afraid it's lights out, and I'll see you soon on the next one.